Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. We are going to break down the very systems that govern our daily lives, and we'll be using a really fascinating source text as our guide. We're essentially going on a journey, starting from ancient kings wearing crowns and issuing royal decrees, all the way to modern citizens like you and me casting our votes. We're going to uncover how power actually works, how it shifted from the rulers to the ruled, and most importantly, why it matters to every single one of us. Let's get into it. To kick things off, let's do a quick thought experiment. Seriously, just imagine for a second if someone else told you what you could say, what you could wear, or even what dreams you were allowed to chase. Pretty wild, right? Well, for centuries, humanity has grappled with the rules and the authorities that govern them. We've lived under the absolute power of single individuals, the strict rules of religion, and the collective voice of the people. But which system actually allows you to live life on your own terms? Well, that's exactly the high-stakes question we're unraveling today. So here's our roadmap for the explainer. First, what is a government? Second, the three organs of government. Third, different types of governments. Fourth, understanding democratic systems. And finally, number 5, why democracy matters. Let's start with section 1. What is a government? We really need to define the system first. Think about this piece of ancient wisdom from Kautilya's Arthashastra. He wrote that a ruler's duties are basically threefold. Raksha, which means protecting the state from external enemies. Palana, which is maintaining internal law and order. And Yogakshema, which means safeguarding the welfare of the people. Our source highlights something really important here. A true leader doesn't just sit comfortably on a throne barking out orders, right? They carry the massive burden of their people's safety and happiness. You know, when we hear the word government, a lot of us just picture politicians in suits arguing in a parliament. But it goes way, way beyond that. In our day-to-day lives, the government is the entity building the roads we drive on. It's running the trains, maintaining the armed forces, providing disaster relief, managing healthcare facilities, running schools, and, hey, even delivering the mail. It's a massive, complex system designed to maintain peace, handle the economy, and provide us with essential services. Moving right along to Section 2, the three organs of government. Let's look at the structure of power. To really wrap our heads around how this is structured, our source text uses a brilliant and super relatable analogy: managing a school. Okay, so imagine a school with a million things to manage: sports, timetables, assemblies. If you want a student committee to help run things, how do you actually pick them? Well, method 1, let every single student join. Honestly, that's going to be way too chaotic to get anything done. Method 2, the head teacher just handpicks a few students. But that lacks fairness, right? Most students' voices just wouldn't be heard. Then there's method 3. Students in each grade elect their own representative to speak for their specific needs. As you can probably guess, this representative approach is the most balanced and democratic way to handle complex organization. So how does that school analogy scale up to an entire country? Well, just like that committee needs to make rules, apply them, and ensure fairness, a national government has 3 main organs. First, the legislative branch. They create the rules, the whole framework for running the country. Next is the executive branch. They're the ones implementing those rules and running the day-to-day operations. And finally, the judiciary. They act as the independent referee, basically ensuring those rules are followed fairly and stepping in if they get broken. All right, on to Section 3, different types of governments. Let's look at some global differences. Now, before we analyze modern regimes, our source gives us 2 incredible historical stories to explain the ancient Indian ideal of Raj Dharma, which essentially means the duty of a ruler. First, we have Bhishma, lying on a literal bed of arrows, advising King Yudhishthira that a ruler must totally avoid ego and govern without any discrimination. Second is the story of King Chandrapita of Kashmir. He wanted to build a temple, but there was a catch. A Hungal shoemaker's house was right in the way. Now, instead of just using his power to seize the land, the king respectfully asked the shoemaker for permission and paid him fair compensation. Raj Dharma meant that absolute power had to be checked by duty and deep respect for even the most ordinary citizen. Over time, of course, we've seen various forms of power emerge. First is monarchy, where power is typically inherited within a royal family. Today, we see absolute monarchies, like in Saudi Arabia, where the king holds complete power over the laws. But then we also have constitutional monarchies, like the United Kingdom, where the monarch is really more of a ceremonial figurehead, and the actual power lies within elected parliament. Then we have theocracy. This is where the source of authority is religion, and religious leaders are the ones who decide who rules. Our sources cite Iran, Afghanistan, and Vatican City as modern examples of this specific system. The source text also objectively outlines a few other forms of absolute power. A dictatorship is a system where one person or a small group holds total control, completely unchecked by any constitution. The source notes historical examples here, like Adolf Hitler in Germany, who eliminated opposition and initiated World War II, and Idi Amin in Uganda. Finally, we have oligarchy. This is a term coming from Greek that literally means rule by a few. In this system, a small, powerful, and usually wealthy group makes all the important decisions. Which brings us to Section 4, Understanding Democratic Systems, the Rule of the People. You've probably heard this quote before. It's by the 19th century U.S. President Abraham Lincoln, and it perfectly anchors the core philosophy of democracy. In a true democracy, the ultimate source of power and authority isn't a king, it's not a religious text, and it's not an army. It comes directly from the citizens. Taking a look here, the Indian parliament is really the physical heart of representation. You see, democracies are built on a few absolutely fundamental principles: equality before the law, regardless of your gender or your wealth; freedom to make choices and express your opinions safely; representative participation through regular elections; and fundamental rights that are there to protect citizens from being exploited. Okay, 1971. Why is this specific year so significant? Well, our source highlights a pretty surprising fact. India granted universal adult franchise, which is the right for every single adult to vote, right at the birth of its republic in 1950. But in Switzerland, which is a highly developed nation, women didn't actually secure the right to vote until 1971. It just goes to show that democratic ideals really take time to evolve and perfect. Now, even within democracies, things aren't exactly uniform. In a direct democracy, like in certain parts of Switzerland today, citizens directly participate in making the laws. But as we learned from our school committee analogy earlier, that is incredibly hard to manage when you have a massive population. So most countries use a representative democracy, where people elect leaders to make decisions for them. This branches into parliamentary systems like we see in India, where the executive branch is chosen from within the legislature, and presidential systems like the USA, where the executive and legislature are elected completely separately. If we look globally, we see some really interesting variations in how this plays out. India and Australia use a prime minister and a dual-house parliament. The USA uses a president and a dual-house Congress. South Korea uses a president too, but only has a single-house National Assembly. But I want you to look closely at that judiciary column on the right. The common thread binding all of these functional democracies together is an absolutely independent judiciary. That referee must remain separate to keep the whole game fair. Let's take a really quick trip in the time machine, because voting is definitely not just a modern invention. The source text reveals that thousands of years ago in India, the Vaji Mahajanapada actually selected leaders by merit through elections. And during the Chola period, inscriptions in Tamil Nadu detail how village assembly members were elected using actual ballot boxes. They even had strict qualifications and immediate removal for corruption. Now, contrast this with the ancient republics of Greece and Rome. They had voting, sure, but women, workers, and slaves were completely forbidden from participating. And finally, we arrive at Section 5, Why Democracy Matters, the Power of Choice. This is a classic 1896 mural by the artist Vedder, simply called Government, and it beautifully symbolizes the weight, the delicate balance, and the protection that a good government provides. A real democracy matters so much because it essentially allows you to choose how you live, what you wear, and what you believe, just as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. It puts the ultimate remote control of the country right in the hands of the people. By actually giving citizens the power to replace their leaders through elections, democracy acts as this massive, constant check against absolute power. But as our source rightly points out, it is definitely not a perfect system. It faces some really severe challenges, things like corruption, widening gaps between the rich and the poor, the loss of judicial independence, and the misuse of media. You see, democracy isn't just a machine that runs itself on autopilot. It is an active responsibility. Citizens must remain vigilant, understand their duties, and actively hold the system accountable. So I want to leave you with a really provocative question, drawn straight from our source material. Is our democracy as strong as we think, or is there still work left to do? Your role in this ongoing story of government is absolutely vital. At the end of the day, democracy is your voice and your freedom. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. If you found this breakdown valuable, remember to subscribe, share this with your friends, and as always, stay curious, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.